13 of the most elite snipers in the United States military had attempted the shot. 13 times the target stood untouched. The wind was wrong. The distance was impossible. The physics, they said, simply didn't allow it. Then a woman nobody had ever heard of walked to the firing line carrying a rifle so old it looked like it belonged in a museum. Colonel Reed laughed out loud. Nobody else was laughing 6 seconds later. But the shot, the impossible, humiliating, record-shattering shot, was the least dangerous thing Nora Vale did that day. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end, because what comes next will shake you. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what city, what country are you watching from? I want to see how far this story has traveled. The Nevada desert did not care about reputations. It did not care about rank, service record, or the number of deployments stitched into a man's career. It had no patience for pride. The heat hit Black Mesa Tactical Range the same way every morning, a flat, punishing wall that started building before sunrise and became something genuinely hostile by 9 a.m. By 10, the air above the range shimmered so badly that the distant ridgeline appeared to float, disconnected from the earth, hovering somewhere between the real world and a mirage. Kind of day that made long-range precision shooting a theoretical exercise. Kind of day that broke confidence. Staff Sergeant Tommy Kowalski lowered his rifle for the third time in 20 minutes, rolled onto his back, and stared straight up at a sky so bleached it barely qualified as blue. He pressed a forearm over his eyes, said nothing, didn't need to. Wins playing games, he finally offered. Flat. No excuses, just fact. Spotter crouching beside him, Petty Officer Marcus Doyle, said even less. He just clicked his stopwatch, wrote something in his notebook, and shook his head almost imperceptibly. 13 attempts, 13 misses, or close enough to misses that they didn't count. 4,100 meters, just under 2.5 miles. Target was a painted steel silhouette, roughly the size of a human torso, set into the face of a rocky escarpment across the valley floor. This distance, through the thermal distortion and the shifting crosswinds that came off the mountain in unpredictable pulses, it wasn't visible to the naked eye. Even through a quality scope, it appeared as a faint, rectangular smudge against pale stone. The shot had been designated Mission Criteria Threshold 7, MCT-7, in the briefing documents. Proof of concept exercise. The Joint Special Operations Command wanted to know whether a 4,000-plus meter engagement was tactically viable for field deployment, or whether it remained in the realm of controlled range mythology. If one of the 13 snipers assembled here could replicate the shot under idealistic atmospheric conditions, the program moved forward. New protocols, new equipment specifications, new training pipelines. If nobody could, the program died quietly and expensively on a Nevada test range. So far, it was dying. Major General Adrian Cross stood at the observation platform, behind the firing line, his arms crossed, watching through his own binoculars. He was a compact man in his late 50s, gray at the temples, with the kind of stillness that people mistake for patience, but is usually something harder. He hadn't spoken much since the exercise began. He asked questions that went nowhere and received answers that said even less. Beside him, Lieutenant Colonel Dana Weiss, the program's technical lead, was working through a tablet full of atmospheric data, wind speed readings, density-altitude calculations, all the variables that made this particular shot a genuine nightmare. She had a habit of chewing on the end of her stylus when she was frustrated. Stylus was getting destroyed. Kowalski's our best, she said, not looking up. If he can't put it on target in these conditions. He didn't say he couldn't. He said the wind's playing games. General, I know what he said. Cross lowered his binoculars. I know you know, Dana. 12 meters to their left, at the edge of the platform, Colonel Mason Reed was doing what he did whenever an operation wasn't going his way, talking louder than necessary. He was a broad-shouldered man with a face that had been handsome once and now just looked like it had survived things. Commanded the range. He'd handpicked 9 of the 13 snipers. This was, in some professional sense, his show. And his show was currently embarrassing him. Atmospheric conditions are within tolerance, he said to nobody in particular, projecting into the general space. The shot is achievable. We just need to wait for a cleaner window. Nobody argued with him. Nobody agreed either. Petty Officer Owen Pike sat on an equipment case 20 feet away, elbows on his knees, watching the dead firing line with the patient expression of a man who had seen enough operations go sideways that one more barely registered. He was 43 years old, built like someone had assembled him from spare parts and then reinforced the joints with hands that had aged faster than the rest of him. He'd been invited as an observer ostensibly for his long-range engagement expertise, but the truth was simpler. He was on medical review, 3 months out from a shrapnel injury that had ended his last deployment, and this was the kind of low-stakes consultation that kept a career technically active while the paperwork sorted itself out. He watched. He said nothing. The next man on the rotation, a SEAL senior chief named Brandt, took his position, settled behind his rifle, and began his preparation sequence. 2 minutes. 3. The spotters read the winds. Brandt made adjustments. His shot hit the valley floor approximately 60 meters short and 40 left of the target. Reed exhaled through his nose. Cross turned to Weiss. Who's left on the list? Weiss scrolled her tablet. Brandt was 12. We have one more on the primary roster. She paused. Scrolled again with the expression of someone who had made a clerical error they were now being forced to acknowledge. And there's a voluntary supplemental name. Added this morning. Who? She looked up. Captain Nora Vale. Logistics and Personnel. Fort Irwin. She said it the way people say things when they don't understand why they're saying them. Cross frowned. She's not on the certification list. No, sir. She submitted a supplemental request at 0600. Per protocol, since she's active duty and present on site, I had to log it. Weiss set the tablet down carefully. Her last recorded qualification range is she check dated 19 years ago. And she hasn't been attached to a combat unit since. Cross said nothing. From his equipment case, Owen Pike looked up slowly. The name had touched something in the back of his skull, light as a fingertip. He couldn't say why. He filed it, said nothing. Reed walked over after Brandt came off the line. We're not doing the supplemental. I'm not putting a logistics officer on a precision marksmanship evaluation. This is a JSOC program assessment, not an open audition. It's her right to request, Weiss said. It's also my range. Reed looked at Cross. General, tell me I don't have to explain why this is a bad idea. Cross looked at the firing line, looked at the target data on Weiss's tablet, looked at the 13 rows of results, none of them successful. Then he said very quietly, She's here? Weiss pointed. Nora Vale was standing at the far end of the platform with a hard-sided rifle case at her feet, not the modern polymer kind but old aluminum with worn latches and a long horizontal scratch across the top that caught the morning light. She was watching the range, not the equipment, not the other personnel, not the officers debating her existence 20 meters away. She was watching the valley. She was average height. 43 or 44, somewhere in there, same as Pike. Actually, though she carried it differently. Short dark hair, a little gray now at the edges. A face that gave away nothing. She wore standard issue utilities without any of the personal gear modifications that SEAL operators tended to accumulate. The aftermarket suspenders and custom radio pouches and expensive sunglasses. None of that. She looked like she'd driven from an office. Because she had. But she was looking at the valley with an attention that had nothing casual about it. Reed walked toward her. She heard him coming and turned. Her eyes went to his rank, first automatic, trained then his face. Captain. Reed stopped 2 meters away. You submitted a supplemental request. Yes, sir. Who approved your range credentials? My base credentials cover active duty military ranges, she said. I checked the supplemental protocol at 0530. I had the right. The right. He repeated it like the word had done something offensive. Captain, do you know what these men have been doing all morning? These are some of the finest long-range shooters in the United States military. This isn't a certification exercise. This is an evaluation with real program implications. Understand that, sir. Then you understand why I'm going to ask you to step back from the firing line and observe from the gallery. She looked at him. Not quite a pause, more like a delay in response. Kind that isn't hesitation. I'd like to make the attempt, sir. Reed stared at her. Then he laughed. Not a good laugh, the short, incredulous kind that men deploy when they've decided someone is being absurd. You belong behind a desk, Captain. Let the professionals work. He said it clearly enough that people heard it. Kowalski heard it. Doyle heard it. Weiss heard it and looked away immediately. Cross heard it and turned back to his binoculars with the expression of a man who has decided not to see something. Owen Pike heard it. Nora said nothing. She bent down, picked up the aluminum case, and walked to the firing line. Reed watched her go. He looked around at the people who had just watched that exchange. Some of them were waiting to see what he did. He let out a breath and walked back to the platform. She set the case down and opened it. The rifle inside was a bolt-action precision rifle, a Macmillan TAS-50 variant, the platform she'd have trained on, but this particular one had history written all over it. Stock was hand-fitted fiberglass with a non-reflective finish worn in patches. The barrel was clean but not new. The scope was an older Schmidt & Bender, not the current generation glass the SEALs were running. There were small scratches on the receiver that spoke to hundreds of hours of field work rather than splayneed preservation. It was not an embarrassing rifle, but it was not what anyone expected her to pull out of that case. Around the line, a few people exchanged glances. Kowalski, who was packing his own equipment nearby, paused and looked at the rifle. His expression shifted from something dismissive to something harder to read. Nora assembled her gear with quiet efficiency. She positioned the bipod, laid out her data book, a spiral-bound field notebook with a cover that had started disintegrating and been repaired with electrical tape, and set out a small box of hand-loaded ammunition. Then she pulled a crumpled paper bag from her kit, and out of it came her ranging equipment, a Kestrel weather station, a small printed card of trajectory data in a protective sleeve, and a handful of survey pegs with colored wind ribbons she'd apparently brought herself. She walked out 50 meters from the line and placed the pegs at intervals, ribbons hanging. Nobody said anything, but people were watching. She came back, lay down behind the rifle, and got still. Kind of still that took something out of you to maintain. Owen Pike had moved. Without deciding to, he'd walked to a position where he could see the firing line properly. He stood there with his binoculars loose in his hand, not raised yet, watching her from 40 meters. She did not fire. 1 minute passed. 2. 5. What is she waiting for? Someone muttered, back on the platform. Reed had his arms crossed again. She's psyching herself up, he said. Or freezing. Weiss said nothing. But Pike was watching the ribbons on Nora's pegs. And he was watching her head, and what he was seeing slowly, the way you recognize something you weren't expecting, was not freezing and was not hesitation. The ribbons near the firing line were angled northeast, stiff, sustained. Farther out, the pegs he couldn't see well, but he knew from the morning's data. The wind curved there, cut back. Near the target face, the ridgeline created a compression zone where the air actually stilled for brief windows. She was reading them, all of them, simultaneously, processing the full picture. He'd seen that exact quality of attention exactly twice before in his career. Both times, it had been in men who belonged to units most people had never heard of. He raised his binoculars. Nora's hand was absolutely steady on the rifle. Her breathing had slowed to something below normal, deliberate, disciplined, almost mechanical. She was working through her position checklist in her head, clearly. Trigger finger relaxed outside the guard. Stock pressure consistent. Eye relief steady. She was reading the wind flags she'd placed. The nearest, ribbon stiff, east-northeast. Intermediate, curling southwest. Far pegs, near still. She was building a ballistic solution in real time, without software, without a dedicated spotter calling adjustments. She was doing it the old way, the patient way, the way that required you to understand not just the shot, but the air the bullet would travel through for 2.5 miles before it arrived. She made one adjustment. Clicked the scope, 2 minutes left. Marked the data book. Waited again. The crosswind at the line shifted. Dropped 5, maybe 8 miles per hour for a period of 6 seconds. She fired. The crack of the TAC-50 rolled across the range, bounced off the far ridgeline, and came back, changed deeper, slower as if the mountains had absorbed it, and were returning something different. 6 seconds of silence. Then the radio operator, who was watching through a spotting scope on the target end, said the 5 words that nobody on that range had said all morning. Impact confirmed. Center mass. The silence after that was different from any silence that had preceded it. Kowalski stopped moving. Doyle looked up from his notebook. Brandt was standing 20 feet away with his rifle case, half closed, and he just left it that way. On the platform, Lieutenant Colonel Weiss set down her tablet and picked up her own binoculars. She looked for a long time. Then she looked at Reed. Reed was staring at the firing line. Nora had not moved from her shooting position. She was extracting the spent brass, setting it to the side, making a note in her data book. Methodical, ordinary, as if she'd just confirmed a 0 and nothing else had happened. Owen Pike lowered his binoculars. He was aware of something in his chest that he couldn't immediately name, a kind of vertigo, the feeling of something you thought you understood rearranging itself without warning. He had spent 22 years in the teams, trained with some of the finest marksmen the military had ever produced, and he had never, not once, seen anyone solve MCT-7 without a dedicated spotter, without top-tier modern glass, without software-assisted ballistic compensation. On the first shot, in these conditions, Major General Cross was already moving toward the firing line before anyone else had found words. He stopped 5 feet from Nora as she was sitting up. Captain. He waited until she looked at him. Who trained you? She held the question a beat before answering. Not evasion, exactly. More like she was measuring the space between what she could say and what she would. Long time ago, sir, she said. Old program. What program? Classified. She met his eyes. Still classified. Last I checked. Cross looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the rifle. Then back at her. You volunteered for this evaluation knowing you might not get a shot. Why? She stood, knees popping audibly, not a young woman's knees. She dusted off her utilities. Because 13 men couldn't do it, and they needed to know it was possible. She zipped the case. Program's worth running, General. You needed proof. Now you have it. Cross stared at her. That's it? That's your reason? What other reason would there be? He studied her face for a long moment. Then he said quietly, so only she could hear it, I'm going to find out who you are, Captain. I'm in the directory, sir. She picked up her case and walked back toward the platform. Reed was waiting. He had positioned himself at the edge of the platform steps, and it was left as unclear whether the positioning was deliberate or just how he'd ended up standing. But it created a physical moment. She had to either stop or step around him. Stopped. He looked at her for 5 full seconds without speaking. Something was working behind his eyes. He was a man who had just been very publicly wrong, and he was deciding what to do with that. Where'd you learn to shoot? He said finally. Before your time, sir. Don't give me that, Colonel. Her voice didn't sharpen, didn't rise. Just landed flat and clean. With respect, I requested the supplemental. I qualified for the slot. I made the shot. We're done here. She stepped past him. He let her. Owen Pike found her 20 minutes later, sitting on a range bench on the shaded eastern side of the facility, her rifle case on the ground, her data book open on her knee. She wasn't writing anything. She was looking at the valley. The heat was building, and the far ridgeline was full mirage now, fully liquid. He sat down on the other end of the bench, without asking permission. She didn't say anything. He put his elbows on his knees. After a while, he said, I was running with SEAL Team 8, 19 years ago. Classified recovery mission in the Pankisi Gorge. We walked into a crossfire that should have ended all 12 of us. Kept looking at the valley. Somebody was working from an elevated position, he said. High ground, extreme range. Systematically cleared our contact zones. He paused. We didn't know who. No JTAC signature, no support element we'd been briefed on. Just positions going quiet, one by one, until we could move. We got out. He was quiet for a moment. I spent a long time trying to find out who was on that gun, he said. Files kept coming back redacted. Program designation came back classified. I eventually stopped asking. He turned his head to look at her. You reading the wind the way you did today, that's a specific discipline. That's not a range discipline, not range built. That's field built. You've done this in the wind before. Real wind. With lives depending on it. Closed the data book. That was a long time ago, she said. Kept looking at her. She didn't look back. Team 8, she said finally. Pankisi, December. 12 men. A pause. I had 37 seconds between my ordered hold position and the first casualty threshold. That was my window. She straightened, set the data book in her case. You all made it home. That was the point. Pike said nothing for a long moment. The heat pressed down. The file said the sniper disobeyed a direct order, he said, to hold position. There was an active cover operation. The sniper's support would have compromised a priority intelligence objective. Picked up the case. I know what the file says, she said. You disobeyed and saved 12 lives. I disobeyed. She stood. One thing doesn't cancel the other. Not to the people who made the decision. He looked up at her. Is that why you're in logistics? She looked at him for the first time, directly. A real look, not the measuring looks she'd been giving everyone all morning. Something passed through her expression that was not bitterness, exactly, and not resignation, exactly, but lived somewhere between them in the territory of things accepted rather than resolved. They needed someone to lose, she said, and I'd already given them the reason. Picked up the case and started walking. Behind her, inside the main operations building, a message had already been sent. Lieutenant General Gregory Voss, 3 stars, Senior Command Authority, currently in transit, had received a priority notification flagged by his office. The message was brief. It contained a name, a location, and a range result. Voss read it once, set his phone face down on the seat beside him, looked out the window at the Nevada sky. He had spent 19 years making sure that name stayed buried. Now it was attached to a confirmed 4,100-meter shot, witnessed by a major general, a program technical lead, and an entire team of special operations personnel. He made one call, 3 words, I'm coming down, continue. The late afternoon light had gone copper-orange by the time Nora got back to her temporary quarters, a Spartan room in the B wing of the range facility, intended for short-duration visitors, the impersonal quality of a room that had housed hundreds of people and kept nothing of any of them. She set her rifle case on the floor beside the narrow bed, sat on the edge of the mattress, and looked at her hands. Shaking. They hadn't shaken on the range. She'd checked the way she always checked, that old discipline, a fractional self-inventory done automatically after a high-pressure moment, like a pilot running post-event checks. Pulse, normal. Breathing, normal. Hands steady. She was fine. She exhaled through her nose and looked at the door. Her phone had 3 new messages from her office at Fort Irwin Standard Logistics follow-up. Nothing unusual. She answered 2 of them with brief, functional replies. The third was a query about a resupply manifest for the following week. She flagged it to respond in the morning. She was halfway through washing her face when the knock came. Not Pike. His knock, she'd have been able to guess by now. Deliberate, measured, the kind of knock that announces itself as a knock before it becomes an intrusion. This was sharper. 2 raps. Practiced brevity. She dried her hands and opened the door. Major General Cross stood in the corridor with no aide, no escort. Just himself, jacket still on, looking tired in the way senior officers looked tired when they were also worried about something. He didn't wait for an invitation. May I? It wasn't a question. Stepped back. He came in, looked at the room briefly, in the way people scan spaces they haven't been in before, and stayed standing. Stayed standing, too. Dana Weiss ran your official record this afternoon, he said. After the shot, I expected she might. Your record shows no precision marksmanship history beyond basic qualification. No formal sniper training, no combat arms assignments. He looked at her steadily. Which means what I watched today either doesn't exist officially, or someone made very sure it wouldn't. She said nothing. The program you mentioned, classified. He said the word carefully. I'm going to make some calls tonight. I know people who can at least tell me whether a classified unit existed matching the operational profile. Not what's in it, just whether it's real. You won't find it, she said. Why not? Because it was deactivated. And then the deactivation record was deactivated. She looked at him evenly. Whoever did the paperwork was very thorough. Cross studied her. Who was that, Captain? She held the question. Held it carefully, the way you hold something that has sharp edges. I'd rather not say tonight, she said. If that's acceptable, sir. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, once. Get some rest. He moved toward the door, paused with his hand on the frame. I want to be clear, I'm not asking because of the program. I'm asking because someone buried a service record that apparently includes saving 12 American lives in a denied access zone under hostile fire. He turned slightly. That interests me, whatever the circumstances. He left. Nora closed the door and stood with her back against it in the dark room. She thought about the notification she knew had already gone out. The shot hadn't just confirmed the program's viability. The shot had turned a light on in a room that had been very carefully sealed for 19 years. She thought about the call she knew would follow. She thought about the man on the other end of it. 3 stars, untouchable or close enough. The kind of career that got built on the silence of other people. And she thought about the day in the Pankisi Gorge when she'd been lying in the snow at minus 14 degrees Celsius, 3,000 meters up, with the sounds of American soldiers getting cut apart in the valley below her, and the order in her earpiece telling her to hold position, hold position, hold positions. She'd held for 9 seconds. Then she'd started working. Crossed to the bed, sat down, and looked at her hands again in the dark. Still steady. Good. Outside, somewhere in the Nevada night, a vehicle crossed the facility perimeter. She heard the engine, heard it stop. She didn't move. She'd been waiting 19 years for whatever came next. She could wait one more night. The vehicle that had crossed the perimeter at night was a black government SUV with Nevada plates and no unit markings. Nora knew this because she'd been awake at 340 when it came through, lying on top of the covers in the dark with her boots still on, insane, listening to the facility settle around her. She'd heard the gate mechanism, heard the slow crunch of tires on packed gravel, heard the engine cut. Then silence. No voices, no radio chatter, none of the casual noise that accompanied normal late arrivals. Just the vehicle and then nothing. She'd stayed where she was and stared at the ceiling. By 500, she was up, dressed, and at the range's eastern observation deck before the sun had fully cleared the ridge. She brought her data book and a cup of bad coffee from the vending machine down the corridor, the kind of coffee that exists purely as a delivery mechanism for caffeine rather than anything resembling flavor. And she sat on the concrete bench and watched the valley turn from black to gray to the particular pale copper that preceded real Nevada daylight. She was running calculations she didn't need to run. It was something to do with her hands. Owen Pike found her there at 530. He didn't say anything at first. He just sat down on the opposite end of the bench, same as yesterday, same studied casualness, and looked at the valley. He had a thermos. He poured himself something that smelled significantly better than what she was drinking and didn't offer to share, which she appreciated. Suggested he'd decided they were past the performance of politeness. After 4 minutes of silence, he said, "Voss is here." She didn't react visibly. Her pen made one mark in the data book. "I know," she said. "He came in last night. He's doing a facilities review. That's the official reason." Cross got a notification at 0200 and didn't look happy about it. Pike turned the thermos cup in his hands. "You expected this." "I expected something." "Nora." He said her name for the first time, without rank, without the careful distance he'd been maintaining. "If what I think happened actually happened, if you were running under Voss's program authority, when you made that call in Pankisi, then having him show up 12 hours after your shot is not a coincidence." "No," she agreed. "It isn't, which means he's not here for the facilities." Closed the data book, set down the coffee, which she'd stopped pretending to drink. Sky was turning real now. The ridgeline sharpening, the valley floor going from shadow to amber. "What do you want to do?" Pike asked. She looked at the valley. "The same thing I wanted to do yesterday," she said. "Go home, file my after action from the supplemental slot, and go back to processing free supply manifests for the rest of the quarter." He looked at her. "But that's not what's going to happen," she said. The morning briefing was held in the main operations room at 700, a wide, low-ceilinged space with topographic maps on 2 walls, a long briefing table, and an AV setup that had been state-of-the-art approximately 8 years ago. Cross ran it himself, standing at the table's head without a prepared deck. He'd summoned the full evaluation team, Weiss, Reed, the senior NCOs, the spotter leads. 13 snipers filtered in over 10 minutes, most of them carrying their own coffee, most of them looking at Nora when they thought she wasn't looking. She was always looking. She sat at the far end of the table, to the right of the door, a chair that in any other context would have suggested marginality, the edge, the last seat filled. Chosen it specifically because it put her back to nothing and gave her sight lines to both the entry and the room. Lieutenant General Gregory Voss entered at 704. He was exactly what 19 years of institutional momentum looked like. Tall, trim, silver-haired in the way that reads as authority rather than age, with the smooth public face of a man who had spent decades being watched and had made his peace with that at a cellular level. 3 stars on his collar. He moved through the room the way senior officers moved through rooms when they were visiting someone else's space, claiming it graciously, which was a particular kind of claiming. He shook Cross's hand first, then Reed's, nodding at Weiss, exchanging brief words with 2 of the SEALs he apparently knew. He didn't look at Nora immediately. That was the tell. When he finally did a controlled, casual glance down the table, the kind of look that encompassed the whole room, his eyes passed over her with practiced neutrality. Not absence of recognition. Practiced neutrality. The performance of not knowing someone. She held his gaze for 2 seconds, then looked back at her data book. Cross began the briefing. He recapped the evaluation's official purpose, which everyone already knew. He walked through the atmospheric data, the performance metrics of the 12 failed attempts, the statistical analysis Weiss had generated. Standard debrief structure. Then he reached the supplemental result. At 11:42 yesterday, he said, a supplemental participant confirmed a 4,000. 107-meter shot under live range conditions. Wind variable from 9 to 17 miles per hour at range intervals. Thermal index at range, significant. Result, center mass impact on first attempt. He paused. This constitutes a successful MCT-7 demonstration. Program viability is confirmed. The room absorbed that. Voss's expression didn't change. Who ran the supplemental? He asked. Same tone as asking who'd ordered lunch. Captain Nora Vale, Cross said. Assigned to Logistics and Personnel, Fort Irwin. Active duty. Voss nodded slowly. Impressive. What's her background? That's currently under review. A brief pause. The kind that lived just long enough to mean something. Under review, Voss repeated. I'd be curious to see her file. If someone on the logistics track is running this kind of performance, that represents a significant oversight in our talent identification process. Agreed, Cross said. His voice was level. We're looking into it. Voss smiled the easy collegial smile of a man raising a reasonable administrative concern. Good. We don't want capable people buried in positions that don't use what they have. He looked down the table. This time he looked at Nora directly. Captain Vale. Congratulations on the shot. Thank you, sir, she said. Quiet. Clean. Nothing added. Voss held her gaze for 1 second more than the sentence required. Then he turned back to Cross. Reed watched the exchange from the middle of the table. His jaw was slightly set. He'd been the ranking range authority for the evaluation. And he hadn't been consulted about the supplemental review, which was a deliberate signal from Cross, and he knew it, and he was deciding how much that mattered. He caught Nora's eye briefly, and for the first time there was something in his expression that wasn't contempt or embarrassment, but something more uncomfortable, a man recalibrating something he'd thought was settled. Settled. She looked away. The formal inspection began at 900 and was thorough in the wrong way, thorough in the way that knew what it was looking for. Voss moved through the range facility with a 2-person aide team and a program officer from JSOC's liaison desk, and he asked the right questions in the right places. Maintenance protocols, safety incident logs, equipment acquisition records. All legitimate, all completely unremarkable. But he took 30 minutes in the personnel and records office, which was 25 minutes more than that particular room required. And when he left, the staff sergeant on administrative duty came to find Weiss within 5 minutes. General Voss's aide requested a complete service history pull, the staff sergeant told her quietly. For the supplemental participant, Weiss stared at him. On whose authority? The general's. He said it was a follow-up to this morning's briefing. Talent identification review. Weiss sent the staff sergeant away and immediately walked to Cross's office. Cross was already on the phone when she got there. She could tell from the specific way he was standing, slightly turned from the door, one hand in his jacket pocket, the body language of a man choosing words very carefully that the call mattered. She waited in the corridor. After 3 minutes, he opened the door and gestured her in, closing it behind her. What? He said, she told him. He was quiet for long enough that it became its own response. Then he said, how much of Vale's record is available in the facility system? Standard personnel file. Assignments, evaluations, medical? Nothing marked classified. She paused. But General, if someone sanitized her record 19 years ago, then what's there now is a curated version. He won't find anything dangerous because anything dangerous was already removed. She stopped, which means he's not looking for evidence. He's checking to confirm the erasure is still intact. Cross looked at her steadily. That's a significant inference, Dana. I know what I'm inferring. She met his eyes. I also know that a 3-star visiting a range evaluation 12 hours after a logistics officer breaks an MCT-7 record is not a scheduling coincidence. Cross sat down. He was quiet for almost a minute, which was unusual for him. Find Vale, he said, quietly. Bring her here. Nora was in the equipment cage when Weiss found her a long, wire mesh enclosed space behind the main armory, where personal gear got checked in and out. She was cleaning the TAC-50, running a bore brush through the barrel with the focused, slightly meditative quality of someone doing something they'd done thousands of times. The motion was economic. No wasted movement. Weiss stopped outside the cage door. She'd prepared a certain version of this conversation on the way over. She discarded it immediately when she saw Nora's face, which suggested that Nora already knew why she was here. "General Cross wants to speak with you," Seiss said. "I know." Weiss watched her reassemble the rifle, lock the bolt assembly, check the trigger. "You know about the file request, too?" "I assumed there'd be one." Nora set the rifle in the case. Looked up. "Who made it?" "General Voss's aide." Nora closed the case. Picked it up. "Then we should go," she said. They walked out of the equipment cage and toward the main building, and Weiss found herself slightly behind, following a woman who moved like she knew exactly where she was going and had known for a while. Cross's office was a commandeered administrator's room, functional, impersonal, smelling faintly of industrial cleaner. He'd pushed the standard issue desk to the side and was sitting in one of the two chairs, in the corner, the arrangement of a man who decided he didn't want a desk between himself and whoever he was talking to. Nora came in. Weiss stayed by the door. Cross looked at Nora. "Sit down, Captain." She sat, set the rifle case beside the chair, folded her hands in her lap, waited. "I need you to tell me something," Cross said. "And I need you to tell me the truth, because I am running out of room to maneuver without knowing what I'm dealing with." She looked at him steadily. "Gregory Voss," Cross said. "Your connection to him. I need to know what it is." She was quiet for a moment, not avoiding the question, organizing the answer. There was a difference, and Cross clearly recognized it because he didn't press. "He was the senior officer who issued the hold order," she said finally, "in Pankisi. He ran the operation my unit was attached to. We were his assets." She paused. "When I broke the hold, I compromised the cover of a meeting he'd arranged. He'd been told his objective, the intelligence objective, took priority over the recovery element. He believed that. He passed the order down, and I didn't follow it. And afterward, I was told that my conduct was under review. Then I was told the review had determined my service record would be restructured. That was the word they used, restructured. My precision qualification history, my unit assignment, my operational record, all of it was reclassified above my clearance level, which had the practical effect of making it inaccessible. Then I was reassigned to a logistics billet at Fort Irwin." She looked at her hands. "Nobody told me Voss ordered it specifically, but he was the only person with both the motive and the authority." "Why didn't you file a complaint?" She looked up at him. "With who, General?" "My entire chain of command above that level was connected to his operation." She said it without heat. Just fact, delivered the way you deliver facts that have had 19 years to calcify. And there was something else. "What?" She was quiet again. Longer this time. "I saw something," she said, "before Pankisi. During the staging period, I was on an overwatch position above the RV site, standard pre-mission security. I saw Vossas at a meeting, not our meeting, a separate meeting at a secondary location, with a contact I didn't recognize." Cross's posture changed, slightly, just a degree of forward lean. "I didn't have recording capability," she said, "just optics. I saw Voss and a man who was not American and not military at a location that should have been cold. I photographed what I could." She paused. "The photographs went into my after-action materials. My after-action materials went into the restructured files. I have not seen them since." The room was very quiet. Weiss, by the door, had stopped moving entirely. "You're describing," Cross said carefully, "the possibility that a United States Lieutenant General was meeting with a foreign national in a covert operational zone." "I'm describing what I saw," Nora said. "I'm not describing what it means. I've had 19 years to think about what it means, and I still don't know." But he was there, and the man he was meeting was not on any manifest I'd been briefed on. Cross sat back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then at her. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you asked," she said. "And because he's here, and whatever fiction kept this contained for 19 years got a lot less stable yesterday at 11:42. They gave her a room adjacent to Cross's temporary office, not a request, exactly, but worded like one, which she accepted because declining would have required an explanation she didn't have energy for. The room had a phone and a window that looked out over the vehicle lot. She stood at the window for a while. Voss's black SUV was still in the lot. His aide came out of the main building at 1,100, made a call, went back inside. At 1,132, of Voss's program staff pulled hard copy folders from a vehicle and carried them in. The folders were thick. Whatever document review he was conducting was not cursory. She ate lunch alone, brought on a tray by a range facility cook who didn't meet her eyes and set it down and left quickly. She didn't know if the avoidance was deliberate or just personality. She ate because her body needed it, not because she was hungry. At 1,300, Pike knocked. He came in and shut the door and didn't sit down and looked at her with the expression of a man who had spent the morning doing what he was good at, which was gathering information without appearing to gather information. "He's pulling the range footage," Pike said. "From yesterday? All of it. The official evaluation record, the supplemental slot footage, the atmospheric data logs." He folded his arms. "The stated reason is program integrity. He wants to verify the MCT7 confirmation is clean before it goes into the official report. That's reasonable on its face." "It's completely reasonable on its face." Pike said it flatly. He also had a 40-minute conversation with Reed after the morning briefing. She looked at him. "What kind of conversation?" Reed's face when he came out of it looked like a man who'd just been told something that confused him, followed by something that concerned him, followed by something he was trying to decide whether to believe. Pike's jaw moved. "I've known Mason Reed for 8 years. He's a lot of things. He's not subtle, and he did not look good when he came out of that room. What did Voss tell him? I don't know. But Reed came out of that meeting and immediately went to find Weiss. They talked for about 10 minutes. Then Reed went somewhere alone." She thought about that. "Voss is building something," she said. "Counter-narrative. He needs Reed as a witness because Reed is the range commander, Reed's assessment. Of my credibility, my mental state, my fitness carries weight. If Reed says I seem unstable or obsessive, or that something about my performance was irregular, that's a long leap. Is it?" Pike didn't answer right away. He looked at the window, at the vehicle lot. "I've been doing this long enough," he said, "to know that a man doesn't drive 300 miles in the middle of the night because someone made a good shot." She nodded. "What do you need?" he asked. She thought about that for a moment. It was a real question and deserved a real answer. "I need to know if anyone kept anything from Pankisi," she said. "After action materials, signals logs, anything from the communication chain that surrounded the hold order. Something outside the classified file system. Something Voss wouldn't have been able to reach." Pike was quiet. "The comm specialist," he said slowly. "On the recovery element. His name was Okoro, David Okoro. He was attached to us from ISA, the support element. Young guy, maybe 23. He paused. "I remember him because he didn't talk much. Spent all his time checking his equipment logs. Even in the middle of the firefight, he was logging. Do you know where he is now?" "No, but I know how to find out." He straightened. Moved toward the door. Stopped. Nora. He said her name the same way he had this morning, without rank. "Voss has 3 stars. His word against yours, even with Pike standing next to you, is not an even fight." "I know. You understand what you're walking into." "I've been walking into it since yesterday morning," she said. Stopped pretending I wasn't. He left. She turned back to the window. The afternoon sun was heavy on the lot, washing everything pale, and Voss's SUV sat at its angle in the shadow of the building's west wall, black and still and very deliberate. Thought about the sound the TAC 50 had made yesterday. Crack, the roll, the return echo from the mountains. She thought about 6 seconds of waiting. She could wait. 1600, Mason Reed knocked on her door. She opened it. He stood in the corridor with no aide, no junior officer, no buffer of any kind, which was unusual for a man of his rank and personality. He had his cover in his hands, actually turning it. In his hands, a nervous gesture she wouldn't have predicted from him. She'd stepped back. He came in. He looked around the small room, didn't sit, stood in the center, with the hat going in slow rotation through his hands. I said something this morning. He started. Yesterday morning, she said. Yesterday morning. He stopped turning the hat. On the range. I said, stopped. Started again. I was out of line. She looked at him. Said nothing. That's not look. He set the hat on the desk beside him like it had become inconvenient. I've been running this range for 4 years. I handpicked those operators. They don't fail at things like this. And then you walked up with a museum piece and a paper bag, and he stopped himself. It was wrong about what I said and how I said it. Okay, she said. He blinked. That's it? Colonel, what do you want from me? I can't tell you weren't wrong. You were. She kept her voice level. But you're here, so something else is going on. He looked at her for a moment, then at the floor, then back. Voss talked to me this morning, Reed said, after the briefing. He said the name like it tasted strange. He told me. He stopped again, and this time the stop was different, the kind that came from a man deciding whether to say something that couldn't be unsaid. He told me that you had a history of making claims that couldn't be verified, that there'd been a formal review years ago about your reliability as a witness to classified events. He said it gently, collegially, like he was warning me, like he was doing me a professional favor by flagging it. The room was quiet. He said the shot was impressive, Reed continued, but that your mental health history might warrant a closer look before your after-action materials went into any official record. He looked at her directly. He suggested, I initiate a fitness for duty referral. She held his gaze. He asked you to do that, she said. He strongly suggested it. Reed picked up his cover again. I've been in long enough to know what a strongly worded suggestion from a 3-star means. And he was quiet for 5 full seconds. The kind of silence that had weight in it. And I told him I'd consider it, he said, because I'm an idiot with a long career investment and a natural instinct toward self-preservation. He looked at his cover. But I also spent the last 6 hours thinking about what I actually saw yesterday on that range. What I actually saw. He met her eyes again. And I'm here instead of filing the paperwork. She looked at him steadily. Let the moment sit. Why, she said. Because whatever you are, he said quietly, you're not unstable. I know what unstable looks like. I've seen it. And what I watched yesterday was something completely different. He shook his head slightly. Also, because a 3-star who drives out in the middle of the night to personally manage the aftermath of someone making a good shot isn't running a wellness check. And I'm too old to pretend I don't know what that looks like. She looked at him for a long moment, measuring. He held it to his credit. If Voss asks again, she said, you're going to have to decide which direction you're standing. That's not a small thing. I know that too. He picked up his cover and put it on, properly, adjusting the angle by instinct. I'm not promising anything. I just thought you should know he made the ask. He went to the door. Read, she said. He stopped. Thank you, she said. It was plain, without warmth but also without coldness. Just accurate. He nodded once and left. She stood in the room for a moment after the door closed. Then she crossed to the window again. Outside, the Nevada evening was coming in fast. The copper draining out of the sky, the facility lights clicking on across the lot. Voss's SUV had moved. It was now parked directly in front of the main building entrance. Closer. She stood at the window and did not look away from it until the light was fully gone. The light was fully gone, and Nora was still at the window when her phone vibrated. No number. Just a text, 3 words. He found Okoro. She stared at the message for 4 seconds, then put the phone face down on the desk and sat on the edge of the bed and pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. Not exhaustion. Something closer to the feeling of a long, slow tide finally reaching the shore, the inevitability of it, the way it had been building for so long that the arrival felt simultaneously sudden and overdue. David Okoro, 23 years old in the Ponkisi Gorge, logging everything with the compulsive precision of a young ISA signals specialist who believed, correctly, that documentation was the only thing that survived when everything else burned. She had watched him from her overwatch position during the staging period, not knowing his name then, just seeing a young man with a notebook who wrote things down, even when nobody told him to. She had thought about him occasionally over the years. Wondered if he'd kept anything. Wondered if it had mattered. Picked the phone back up and typed, "Where?" The response came in 40 seconds. Reno. Retired. He kept everything. She sat with that for a moment. Then, does Voss know about him? A longer pause this time. 90 seconds. Then unknown. But if he's pulling the full signals archive from Ponkisi, Okoro's name is in the comms manifest. It's a matter of time. She set the phone down again. The room had the particular silence of a space where decisions get made not comfortable, silence not peaceful, but the specific quiet of a moment where the weight of what comes next is making itself felt. She looked at the ceiling. She looked at her hands. Then she stood up, picked up her data book, and went to find Cross. His office light was still on. She knocked twice, heard him say, "Come in," and came in. He was at the desk, the moved desk, the one he'd pushed to the side. But he'd apparently pushed it back at some point during the day, restoring the normal geometry of authority. He had documents in front of him, reading glasses on, a half-empty cup of something cold at his elbow. He looked up. She closed the door. "Sir," she said, "I need 24 hours. He took his glasses off. Set them on the desk. For what? There may be a witness. Someone from the Ponkisi operation who kept materials from the signals archive. If those materials still exist, they would include the comms record from the hold order." Cross was very still. "The comms record," he said carefully, "would show who issued the order, and in what terms, and what was said after." She kept her voice level. "The hold order went out on a restricted channel. My compliance or non-compliance would be logged. Any subsequent communications about my conduct would also be logged, if those logs still exist. If they still exist," she agreed. He looked at her for a long moment. "Voss has been in the program records room twice today. He's requested the full signals archive from the Ponkisi operation through official channels. His office made the request this afternoon. Standard post-operation review. That request will take how long to process? 48 hours minimum. 72 if ICSOC's document office is backlogged, which it usually is. The archive exists and the witness has independent copies. That's a different landscape than the official record." "Yes, sir." He leaned back, looked at her with the expression of a man doing arithmetic that wasn't quite adding up the way he wanted. "You're asking me to give you time to find corroboration before Voss controls the narrative." "I'm asking for 24 hours, she said. "What you do with whatever I find is your decision." He was quiet for a long time. Outside, somewhere in the facility, a door closed. Footsteps crossed a corridor and faded. "I can keep Voss occupied through a formal program review session tomorrow morning," he said. "I'll make it comprehensive. Dana can run the technical evaluation debrief. That'll take 2-3 hours. After that, I can't guarantee his schedule. That's enough." "Is it?" She looked at him. "It'll have to be." He picked up his glasses, didn't put them on, turned them in his hand once. "Captain." If you go to this witness and what he has doesn't hold up, if the materials are incomplete or degraded, inadmissible, for any reason, then you're on record, having made accusations against a 3-star general based on a 19-year-old memory and a shot on a range. I know. Voss will use that. He's already building the framework. Reed told you about the fitness referral. That suggestion doesn't go away just because Reed decided not to file it. I know that too. He studied her. You've thought this through. I've had 19 years, she said. He put his glasses back on, looked at the documents. Get some sleep first, he said without looking up. You're no good to anyone running on 4 hours. She went to the door. Vale. He said it without looking up from the page. She stopped. If you find something, he said quietly, don't bring it to me first. Bring it to the Inspector General's office. You go through me. Voss can argue chain of command interference. You go direct to IG. It's protected disclosure. He paused. I'll give you the contact. She stood at the door for a moment. Then she said, Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, he said. Go to sleep. She slept 3 hours, which was better than she expected. Up at 400. In the vehicle she'd arrived, in a rented sedan, nothing remarkable, the kind of car that didn't warrant a second look on the highway north toward Reno before 430. The Nevada desert at night had its own quality of silence, the highway cutting through it in a straight line that stretched further than the headlights reached. The absolute dark of terrain with no ambient light, no towns, no interruption. She drove with the radio off. The engine noise was enough. She didn't need anything else in her head right now. She reached Reno at 712. Pike had texted an address. A residential neighborhood in the south part of the city. Older houses, mature trees, the kind of block that had been built for working families 40 years ago and had aged into something comfortable and a little worn. Parked on the street. Sat for a moment. The house was a tan single-story with a concrete driveway and a vegetable garden running along the south fence tomatoes, from what she could see, and something with broad dark leaves she didn't immediately identify. Dog was barking somewhere nearby, not at her, just at the morning. She got out and walked to the door and knocked. It took 2 minutes. Sounds inside movement, something scraping, a light going on. Then the door opened, and David Okora was standing there. He was 52 now, which meant she was looking at a man who'd had 30 years to move away from the she'd watched through optics in the staging zone of a classified operation. Filled out broader through the shoulders, heavier in the face, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the look of a man woken 10 minutes before he was ready to be woken. He was wearing a university sweatshirt and holding a phone. He looked at her, and something moved through his face, a cascade of recognition that started slow and arrived hard. He knew her, not from a meeting, not from any introduction, from something else. You're her, he said. She didn't answer that directly. My name is Nora Vale. I was the sniper on the Pankisi operation, December minus. I know who you are. He looked past her at the street. Back. Pike called me last night. I know. Can I come in? He stepped back. She came in. The inside of the house was the organized disorder of a man who lived alone and had strong opinions about certain things and no opinions about others. The kitchen was spotless. The living room had 3 different ongoing projects, a disassembled radio on the coffee table, stacks of documents in labeled boxes along one wall, a laptop open to a signals analysis program she recognized from her own service background. Couch had a blanket folded on one end and a dog-eared paperback upside down on the cushion. He led her to the kitchen, put a kettle on without asking. She didn't object. How much did Pike tell you? She asked. You made a shot yesterday that got Voss's attention. He leaned against the counter. And that Voss is at the range right now, doing things that don't add up. He's trying to rebuild the narrative about Pankisi before anything surfaces. She kept her voice flat, informational. He's requested the official signals archive. If the archive is complete, it contains the comms record from the hold order, my non-compliance, and anything said afterward about my reassignment. Okoro looked at her steadily. The official archive is sanitized, he said. I assumed. I know it is because I watched them do it. He said it without anger. Just fact. The way she'd said things to Cross the previous night, the particular neutrality of someone who has processed something difficult over a long time, and arrived at something on the other side of it. Weeks after Pankisi, a team came through, signals review, pulled everything from the operational record, every channel log, every timestamp, every authentication string, told us it was standard post-operation classification. He looked at the kettle. It wasn't standard. I'd done 4 classified operations before that. None of them had a signals sweep that thorough. None of them went back that far in the comms chain. How far did they go back? He looked at her. 72 hours before the hold order. She held that. That covers the pre-operation window, she said quietly. Staging period. Yes, he said. The kettle started. He turned and made 2 cups of something dark and set one in front of her without ceremony, and she drank it without asking what it was. Kept copies, he said. She set the cup down. Before the sweep team arrived, he said. I had a 6-hour window between the notification and their arrival. I don't know why I did it. I told myself it was professional habit signals specialist's document. That's the job. The truth is, I'd been in long enough to know that when someone tells you something happened a specific way and the evidence all points somewhere else, the evidence matters more than the story. He turned and opened a drawer and took out a key physical old-fashioned, the kind for a combination lockbox, rather than a digital lock. Copied everything I had. Full channel logs for the 72-hour pre-operation window. The hold order sequence. The authentication trail. He paused. And a dataset I didn't understand until about 3 years later. She waited. There was a second comms channel, he said, running parallel to the operational frequency. Encrypted differently, not mission encryption, a different signature. I logged it because I logged everything. I didn't know what it was at the time. He turned the key in his fingers. 3 years later, I had the background and the tools to run the encryption signatures through an open-source analysis database. It matched a foreign signals profile. The kitchen was very quiet. Which profile? She said. He looked at her. Russian FSB, he said. 2004 era signature. Legacy encryption, the kind that was standard for a specific class of operational communications. She sat with that, let it land where it landed. The channel was active, she said, during the pre-operation window. For 4 hours, he said, starting 8 hours before the hold order was issued. She looked at her hands on the table. 8 hours before Voss ordered her to hold position, there had been a parallel comms channel active between someone at the operations site and a foreign signals source carrying a Russian FSB signature. She had seen Voss at a secondary meeting location during the staging period. She had photographed it, and the photographs had vanished with everything else. You have this documented, she said. I have the raw logs, he said. Channel data, the timestamp record, the encryption signature analysis. Everything I just told you, I can show you on paper. Where? He held up the key. The lockbox was in a garden shed behind the house, buried under the floor, under a section of removable decking, not particularly sophisticated concealment, but practical. The kind that worked because it was physical rather than digital, and because nobody looking for documents as thought to look under vegetable garden storage. He dug it out with the practiced ease of someone who had done it before, checked on it, checked in it, made sure it was still there. The box was a military surplus fireproof unit, scratched and dented on the outside, intact on the inside. He opened it on the garden shed workbench, under a single overhead light. Inside was a sealed waterproof pouch. Inside the pouch was a USB drive old format, the kind used in 2004, with an adapter taped to it for current ports and a sheaf of printed documents in plastic sleeves. She didn't touch anything without asking. He nodded, and she picked up the first sleeve. The channel logs were exactly what he'd described. Timestamp-stamped entries, frequency notation, authentication strings that meant something specific to someone with signals training. Parallel channel data was separate flagged in his original notation system with a red tab marker, the kind of material that had seemed anomalous enough to mark even when he didn't know what it meant. She turned the pages slowly. He was not a signal specialist, but she knew enough to read the structure of what she was looking at, and what she was looking at was exactly what he'd said it was. She set the sleeve down. "If this goes to the right people," she said, "do you understand what you're putting yourself in front of?" He looked at her without flinching. "You asked me the same thing 19 years ago." She looked at him. "You didn't know my name," he said. "But you saw me in the staging zone." "I know you did. I saw you looking." He set his hands on the workbench. "I was 23 years old, and I watched 12 men go into that valley, and I listened to the hold order go out, and I watched the comms channel light up, and I didn't understand what I was seeing, but I logged it. And then 2 months later, I watched a team come in and make it disappear." He paused. "I've been waiting for 19 years for someone to come to this door." She looked at him for a long moment. "I'm going to need to take copies," she said. "I made copies for you," he said. "Last night, after Pike called." She was back on the highway south at 930, with a second waterproof pouch on the passenger seat that she did not look, but was aware of the way you're aware of something that changes the weight of everything around it. She drove carefully, not slowly enough to be notable, not fast enough to draw attention. The Nevada morning was building into heat, and the highway shimmer was starting early, and she drove through it with both hands on the wheel and the radio still off. She was 40 minutes out from Black Mesa, so when her phone rang, "Pike," she answered on speaker. "I'm on the way back." Change of plans. His voice was tight, not panicked. Pike didn't panic, but tight in the specific way that meant something had happened while she was gone. Voss moved up his schedule. The program review, cross setup, he cut it short. Weiss tried to extend the technical debrief, and Voss told her directly that he had other priorities. What priorities? He called a formal session. Command conference room, 1100. He's listed it as a program integrity review, but the attendee list includes the JSOC liaison, Reed, and a pause. "Your name is on the attendee list, Nora." She watched the road. "He's accelerating," she said. "He filed the fitness referral himself," Pike said. "Not through Reed, directly under his own authority. Psychological evaluation referral for the MCT-7 supplemental participant. Filed this morning at 0830. If you walk into that meeting without something in your hand, he tables the referral, and Cross has to act on it." She checked the dash clock, 948. "I'll be there by 1040, she said. "Nora, listen to me. He has the room. He has the rank. He has a filing that now exists in the official record. You walk in there with a 19-year-old memory and a good shot, it's not enough." She looked at the pouch on the passenger seat. "I'm not walking in with a memory," she said. Silence on the line. "What did Okoro have?" Pike asked. "Everything," she said. She heard him exhale. "Get here," he said, and ended the call. She came through the Black Mesa gate at 1037 and did not go to her room and did not go to Cross's office. She went directly to the facility's administrative section, found the duty station, and asked for a secure fax line to the Inspector General's field office in Las Vegas. The duty officer, a young sergeant, who was visibly uncertain whether this was a normal request, looked at her rank, looked at her face, and made the call to give her the line. Spent 11 minutes transmitting. She spent 11 minutes transmitting. Done. She took the originals and the copies and put them back in the pouch and sealed it, and then she walked to the command conference room. The door was closed. She could hear voices inside, low, not raised, the tone of a meeting that had started without her. She checked her watch. 1054. 6 minutes early. She opened the door and walked in. The room went quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet when someone enters who was being discussed. Voss sat at the table's head cross's position from the morning briefing, which he had taken without comment. Reed was to his right. The JSOC liaison, a bird colonel named Garrett she'd seen briefly at the range, was to his left. Weiss was at the far end, positioned the same way Nora had positioned herself, in the morning briefing edge of the room, back to nothing, watching. Cross was seated to one side, not at the head, not at the foot. Seated, which told her everything about the geometry of power Voss had arranged in her absence. 2 aides sat against the wall, with tablets and notebooks. There was a chair at the foot of the table, empty, positioned for her. She walked to it and sat down and put the pouch on the table in front of her. Voss looked at the pouch. His expression didn't change, but his eyes moved to it and stayed there for a half-second longer than incidental interest. And that half-second told her that whatever else she didn't know, his instinct about what it might contain was working correctly. Captain Vale, he said. Warm, measured, the voice of a man who had been running this particular performance for 19 years. Thank you for joining us, sir, she said. We're here, Voss said, addressing the room because a program integrity question has been raised. The MCT-7 confirmation is significant, and we want to make sure the record around it is clean. He paused. Captain Vale's participation in the supplemental slot raises some questions I'd like to address directly. What questions? Cross said. His voice was level. Primarily. Voss looked at Nora. Captain, your service record doesn't reflect the training background that would normally produce the result we saw yesterday. That's a discrepancy. When a discrepancy exists in official records, we have an obligation to understand it. My record was restructured, she said. At your request, he said gently, following a period of significant operational stress. The room heard it. The framing was precise, not an accusation, just a gentle correction of a misunderstanding. At your request, not by Voss, not under anyone's direction. Her own request. She looked at him. That's not accurate, sir, she said. Paperwork indicates. I know what the paperwork indicates. She kept her voice flat, even. I'd like to know who signed the restructuring authorization. Pause. Brief. Captain, this isn't because my signature isn't on it, she said. I never requested a record restructuring. I never consented to a reassignment to logistics. I was informed after the fact that decisions had been made. She held his gaze. I'd like to know who made them. Voss looked at her with the expression of a man managing a situation that had developed a minor complication. Captain, I understand this is a sensitive topic. Your service clearly involved things that were difficult. The fitness referral I've filed is not punitive, it's protective. There's confusion about past events. There's no confusion. Then the right approach is a proper evaluation, not. Her voice didn't rise, didn't sharpen, but it stopped him. I have a question for you. He stopped. The room was absolutely still. December 16th, she said. Pankisi staging zone. There was a secondary meeting location, a site not on the operational manifest. She watched his face. You were there. I had optics on you. The silence that followed had a different texture from normal silence. It was the silence of people in a room suddenly understanding that what they were watching was not what they had been told it was. Reed's jaw moved slightly. The JSOC colonel had gone very still. Cross, at the side of the room, had both hands flat on the table. Voss looked at her for 4 full seconds. Something passed through his eyes, not fear, exactly, but the recognition of a man who has just seen the ground change under his feet. It was very, very good. The performance barely flickered. Captain, he said, carefully, I think this conversation would be better handled in a different setting. Clinical setting where there was a comms channel, she said, running parallel to the operational frequency. During the pre-operation window, encrypted with a signature that doesn't match mission encryption. She put her hand on the pouch. I have the logs. The room changed. Changed the way a room changes when the word logs follows parallel comms channel and foreign encryption signature in a conversation that already contains a 3-star general and a SOC liaisons officer and a formal fitness referral. It changed physically people's posture, the weight of the air, the specific quality of stillness that was no longer just awkward silence, but something with legal dimensions. Voss looked at the pouch. He looked at her, and for the first time in the conversation, for the first time, perhaps in 19 years, she saw it. Behind the polish, behind the managed expression, behind all of it. To flash. He hadn't known about Okoro. He had sanitized the official record completely. He had removed everything she'd given the after-action system. He had covered the meeting, the channel, the photographs, the communications chain. He had buried a signal specialist's name in a classified manifest and never followed up because why would he young ISA attaché, one of a dozen support staff, nothing remarkable. He hadn't known. And now she was sitting across from him with a sealed pouch on the table and the IG's office in Las Vegas with a fax machine that had received 11 minutes of transmission material 45 minutes ago. She held his gaze. He held hers, and the room waited. Colonel Garrett, the JSOC liaison, spoke first, quietly, carefully, the voice of a man who had just recalculated something significant. General Voss. Perhaps we should pause the session. Voss did not look at him. He kept his eyes on Nora. She didn't move. She'd made a 4,107-meter shot in crosswinds with thermal distortion and a rifle that belonged in a museum. She had waited 5 years to pull the trigger and 6 seconds for the impact. She could hold eye contact with Gregory Voss for as long as it took. Garrett said General, and Voss very slowly looked away. The shift was small. A degree of movement, a redirection of gaze to the table in front of him, a single, settling breath. Anyone who wasn't looking for it might have missed it. Nobody in that room missed it. Cross picked up his phone and made a call without a word of explanation, and when the other end answered, he said, 3 words, "We need IG." Reed was looking at the table. His hands were pressed flat against it, and he was not looking at Voss, and he was not looking at Nora, and whatever was happening behind his eyes was happening privately. Then slowly he reached forward and moved his water glass 6 inches to the left. A pointless movement. The kind a man made when he needed to do something with his hands while he made a decision. He looked up at Nora, and he gave the smallest nod she'd ever seen. Barely more than a degree of movement, his chin dropping and lifting again. But it was there, and it was clear, and it meant what it meant. She looked back at Voss. His hands were on the table. Flat. Still. Outside the windows, the Nevada morning was in full heat now, the desert brilliant and merciless and entirely without shade, and it pressed on the glass of the conference room windows like a reminder that nothing outside cared about what happened in here. Not the heat, not the distance, not the valley where yesterday a shot had traveled 4,107 meters through crosswind and thermal distortion and arrived exactly where it was aimed. Nothing worth doing had ever been without the possibility of failure. She had known that for 19 years. She sat with her hand on the pouch and waited for what came next. The IG arrived in 2, not 2 hours. 2 people, a man and a woman in civilian clothes, who came through the facility door at 1,147 with federal credentials and the particular quality of unhurried speed that characterized investigators who had learned not to look rushed, even when they were. Special Agent Diane Marsh was 50, gray-haired, with a face that gave away nothing and a voice that gave away in less. Her partner, Agent Carl Reeves, was younger, thinner, carrying a hard case recorder and a laptop that he set up on the conference room's side table without waiting to be invited. Voss had not left the room. This was the detail that told Nora the most about him, that he had stayed. A guilty man with options leaves. A man who has survived 19 years by controlling rooms and narratives. And the definitions of events stays and tries to control this one too. He was sitting at the table with his hands flat and his face composed. And when Marsh came in, he looked up at her with the expression of a general receiving a subordinate. Marsh did not respond to that expression. "General Voss," she said, "I'm going to need you to step out." A pause. "This is a military facility." "Yes, sir, and I'm here on federal authority pursuant to a protected disclosure filed this morning." She looked at him steadily. "Step out, please." He stepped out. Reed watched him go. Then Reed looked at Marsh, and something loosened in his posture a fraction, the degree of a man who had been holding something tightly for several hours and had just been given permission to set it down. He didn't say anything. He just straightened in his chair. Marsh set a recorder on the table and looked at Nora. "Captain Vale, I've reviewed the transmitted materials. I have questions. I have answers," Nora said. What followed was 3 hours and 40 minutes of the most specific conversation Nora had ever been part of. Marsh ran it like engineering, no extraneous language, no atmospheric preamble, no courtesy friction. She went through the Ponkisi operation from the beginning, unit composition, mission, parameters, Nora's role, the hold order, the decision to break it, the aftermath. She had the transmitted documents open on her laptop, and she moved through them the way a navigator moves through charts with the confidence of someone who knows the territory and is checking specific coordinates. Reeves recorded everything. He also, periodically, asked technical questions about the signal's data, questions that were more informed than Nora had expected, which meant either he had signal's background or he'd been briefed fast, and the quality of the questions suggested the former. Cross stayed. Marsh let him stay because he'd made the initial IG contact, and his presence was part of the record. Sat at the side of the room and said very little, but Nora could feel him listening with the particular attention of a man assembling a picture he hadn't had before. Reed stayed too, which was not required, and which Marsh noted without objecting to. He was a witness to Voss's fitness referral request. Made him relevant. "Walk me through the meeting Marsh said. "The secondary location. Everything you saw." Nora walked her through it. Overwatch position. Pre-dawn, which made optics difficult, but not impossible with the right glass. The secondary site was a stone structure, partially ruined, used historically by local traders, off any operational map she'd been briefed on. 2 figures. Voss, identifiable by build, movement pattern, the specific way he stood that she'd cataloged from 3 weeks of working under his command structure. The other figure, male, her age or older, dressed in civilian clothes, appropriate to the region. Nothing military about his appearance or his posture. Duration of the meeting, Marsh said. Approximately 22 minutes. My log would have the precise timestamp, but my log was in the materials that were reclassified. You photographed the meeting. I photographed what I could from the angle I had. The second figure's face, 3 times. Partial profile the first time, better angle the second. The third was obscured by movement. She paused. I submitted the images in my after-action materials. I never saw them again. Marsh looked at her over the laptop. You understood, when you submitted them, that they were significant. I understood they were anomalous, Nora said, a senior officer at an off-manifest location during the pre-operation window. I documented it because that's what you document. Whether they were significant, she paused. I didn't know until the hold order came through the following day. Why did the hold order change your assessment of the meeting? Nora held that for a moment, because the hold order came at the exact point in the firefight when breaking it would have been most useful to anyone who wanted the recovery element eliminated. Timing was precise, and the order came from the same officer I'd seen at an unauthorized meeting 12 hours before. Marsh wrote something. You're describing the inference. I'm describing what I thought at the time. I'm not telling you what it means. It's your job. Something moved across Marsh's face, the micro-expression of a woman who had just been told something she appreciated. It was there and gone in half a second. After you broke the hold order, Marsh said, walk me through what happened. Nora walked her through it. 37 seconds between the last hold confirmation in her earpiece and the first casualty threshold. She had been in position for 9 hours at that point, a prone hide at 2,000, 800 meters elevation, temperature -14, a snow and rock surface that had been cold, soaking into her for the entire duration. Her hands were functional, but slow. Her first shot had taken 6 seconds longer than it should have, because her trigger finger needed 60 seconds of movement to restore proper feeling, which she'd done during the final radio exchange when she'd already made the decision. 12 men in the valley. The contact force had established 3 firing positions, elevated interlocking arcs, a textbook hammer and anvil setup that had clearly been prepared in advance. The recovery element had walked into something that had been waiting for them. First shot at the primary elevated position, 2,940 meters. The shooter there had been the one providing suppressive fire that was keeping the element pinned. Gone. Second shot at the secondary position, left side of the valley. 3,100 meters. Slight uphill angle, wind pushing right at 15 miles per hour at range. Took the shot on the exhale with a 3 mph hold correction. Third shot, right elevated, 3,080 meters, simpler angle. Cleaner. Fourth and fifth shots at ground level positions that had begun to reorient after losing elevation cover. These were faster shots at shorter ranges, closer to 2,200 meters, and she'd run them on a compressed timeline because the element had started to move and moving men needed cover more than stationary men. After the fifth shot, the valley had gone quiet enough that the element could move. All 12 made it to the extraction point. She'd stayed in position for another 4 hours before extracting because the protocol she'd been trained to was to stay until the mission window closed, hold order or no hold order, because the hold order was about the operation above, not about the men below, and if she'd been wrong about all of it, she would deal with the consequences when she got out. She hadn't been wrong. The consequences came anyway. Marsh listened to all of it without interrupting. When Nora finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Reeves was typing. The recorder's green light blinked steadily. I want to talk about the reassignment, Marsh said. Who informed you of the restructuring? A JAG officer. Captain Ellison, I don't know his first name. He came to my quarters at Kandahar Airfield 3 weeks after Pankisi. He had paperwork. He explained that a review had determined my operational record required reclassification due to the classified nature of the unit and mission, and that my assignment was being restructured for the same reason. He used the word restructured 3 times, Nora said. I noticed because it was a specific word choice. Not reassigned. Not transferred. Restructured. Did you sign anything? He had a signature page. He told me it was an acknowledgement of the reclassification, not a consent form. I asked him to clarify, and he said again it was an acknowledgement. I signed it. She looked at Marsh. I was 24 years old, and I'd just spent 3 weeks in a holding pattern at Kandahar, being told my conduct was under review, and I was tired, and I signed it. I know what that looks like. It looks like someone who was tired, Marsh said without inflection. It looks like someone who should have gotten a lawyer, Nora said. Marsh nodded once. Did the JAG officer mention who had initiated the review? No, I asked. He said it was above his clearance level to specify. Did you ask anyone else? My direct chain of command. 3 people. All of them told me the same thing. The decision had come from a level they couldn't access, and they had been instructed not to discuss it. She paused. One of them, my company commander, told me off the record that the order had come from a flag officer and that pursuing it would end my career in ways I couldn't recover from. She looked at her hands briefly. He wasn't wrong. Marsh closed one window on her laptop, opened another. General Voss has, in the last 36 hours, requested a fitness referral for you, requested a full signals archive from the Penkisi operation, and conducted what appears to be a personal review of your service file. She looked up. In your assessment, what was he looking for? Confirmation that the erasure was complete, Nora said. He needed to know whether there was anything in accessible records that could support what I saw. My record is sanitized, he knew that. But the shot created visibility. People started asking questions about my background. Any serious inquiry into my background would eventually hit the wall where my operational history should be. And someone smart would recognize that a wall isn't the same thing as an absence. And the fitness referral. Preemptive credibility management. If I make any claims about Penkisi, he has a documented psychiatric referral on record that gives him a framework to describe those claims as symptomatic rather than factual. She said it without bitterness. Just analytically, it's elegant. I'd have done the same thing. Cross made a sound. Not a word, just a sound in his throat that might have been a laugh or might have been something else. Marsh looked at Reed. Colonel Reed. General Voss approached you yesterday regarding Captain Vale. Reed straightened. He'd been listening with the stillness of a man who had been waiting for this specific moment and was now deciding how to occupy it. He did, Reed said. Tell me what he said. Reed told her. He was accurate, and he was complete, and he did not soften any of it, not Voss's suggestion about the fitness referral, not the framing Voss had used about Nora's reliability as a witness, not the collegial warmth with which it had all been packaged. He told it the way a man told something, when he had decided that the most professionally useful thing he could do was to be precisely accurate. When he finished, Marsh looked at him for a moment. You declined to file the referral. I decided not to file it, Reed said. He made the distinction deliberately. Why? Reed was quiet for a moment. He looked at the table, then at Nora, then back at Marsh. Because I saw what she did on that range, he said. And because a 3-star driving through the night to personally manage the aftermath of a good shot isn't something I can explain any other way than the way it actually is. Marsh wrote something, looked at Cross, General Cross. You made the initial contact with this office. I did, Cross said. He looked at Nora briefly. Because someone's buried a service record that includes 5 precision eliminations at ranges exceeding 2,000, 900 meters under hostile conditions, the preservation of 12 American lives, and 19 years of subsequent service, in a position that was designed to keep her invisible. He paused. And because the man who appears to have done the burying showed up at my facility 12 hours after she made herself visible again. He looked at Marsh. That seemed like something you should know about. Voss was in a separate room, a conference room 2 doors down, with an aide and, as of 1,000, and 300, a JAG officer who had arrived from Nellis. Nora knew this because Pike told her, appearing in the corridor outside the IG session during a break, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed in the expression of a man who had spent the morning collecting information the way he'd spent his career collecting it quietly, without anyone noticing he was doing it. He's on the phone, Pike said. Has been since they separated him. His aide keeps going back and forth to the vehicle. Who's he calling? Can't say. But his JAG is making noise about the disclosure process, suggesting the IG contact was procedurally irregular. He looked at her. They're going to challenge the transmission. Try to argue it was improperly filed. It was filed under protected disclosure protocol. Cross gave me the contact directly. I know. They know. They're going to argue it anyway, because arguing takes time and time is what they need. He pushed off the wall. Okoro. Does he know what's coming? I told him before I left Reno. He said he'd been ready for 19 years. Pike looked at her. How are you doing? She thought about how to answer that honestly. I'm functional, she said. That's not what I asked. She looked down the corridor. The facility was quieter than it had been. The evaluation team had mostly dispersed. The SEALs were cleared to leave, and the operational rhythm of the range had reduced to its skeleton. The building felt like it was holding its breath. I'm tired, she said. I've been tired for a long time. Today is just louder than usual. He nodded. You should eat something. You sound like someone's mother. I sound like someone who's seen people crash hard after long operations because they forgot they had bodies. He produced a granola bar from a jacket pocket and held it out. She looked at it for a moment, then took it. He watched her eat half of it. The JSOC liaison, he said. Garrett. He's been on the phone too. Different calls than Voss. What kind of calls? The kind where you step outside and speak quietly and come back looking like you're doing math in your head. He paused. I think he's running his own assessment of which direction this lands. Which direction does it land? Pike considered that. Depends on what the encryption signature analysis holds up as. If Reeves can authenticate the foreign comms data through official channels, then it's not just a hold order anymore. It's something with different dimensions entirely. He looked at her steadily. You understand that, right? What the channel data potentially means for the scope of this. She did understand. She had understood since Okoro had said Russian FSB 2004 era signature in his garden shed with a kettle on the stove. She had understood it in the abstract for years, the meetings she'd photographed. The timing of the hold order, the 18 years of systemic burial that had followed. Understanding it in the abstract and hearing it said aloud in a specific technical vocabulary were different things, and the distance between them was the distance between suspicion and evidence. I know what it means, she said. Then you know this is bigger than your success record. It was always bigger than my service record, she said. My service record was just the part that touched me. He was quiet for a moment. You could have stayed home, he said. Could have just gone back to Irwin. Let the shot stay as a footnote. No, she said. I couldn't. He looked at her. He was going to move on this regardless, she said. The shot created visibility. He needed to eliminate the risk. If I'd gone back to Irwin, the fitness referral follows me there. My commanding officer gets a call. The narrative gets established at a distance where I have even less ability to counter it. She finished the second half of the granola bar. At least here I had a table to put something on. 1,530. Marsh called a recess and came to find Nora in the corridor. She was direct. The USB drive. I need Okoro here. Or a certified forensic copy, authenticated by a qualified signals analyst. The printed documents can be entered into the record directly, but the digital data needs chain of custody authentication before it carries evidentiary weight. How long? If Okoro drives down tonight and we have a signals analyst available tomorrow morning. Marsh paused. Can have someone from the technical division at Nellis here by 0800. I'll call him. There's another issue. Marsh said it in the tone of someone who has been working up to something. The fitness referral Voss filed. It's in the system. Even if this investigation proceeds and produces results, that filing doesn't automatically disappear. It generates administrative obligations on your command. Nora looked at her. My CO at Irwin is going to receive notification, she said. Most likely within the next 24 to 48 hours. The system is automated. I know. She looked at the ceiling briefly. Then at Marsh. What happens to my access in the interim? To this facility, to the investigation. As of this moment, you're a protected disclosant and a material witness. Supersedes the administrative processing of the referral. Marsh paused. But Captain, your CO is going to have questions. And whoever calls from Voss's office is going to have a prepared answer when your CO asks. I know, Nora said. I'll call my CO myself. before anything else gets there. Marsh nodded, looked at her for a moment with something that wasn't quite respect and wasn't quite pity, but lived in the territory between them. "You've been managing this for a long time," she said. "Not a question. Managing is a generous word," Nora said. "I've been surviving it." Marsh went back to the conference room. Nora called Okoro. He picked up on the second ring. "I need you here," she said. "Tonight. Bring everything." Pause. "How bad is it?" "It's real," she said. "Which means it can be dealt with." She paused. "I wouldn't ask if there was another way." Another pause. "Then I'll leave in an hour." She ended the call and stood for a moment in the corridor. Then she called her CO at Fort Irwin, Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Haas, who had commanded the logistics section for 3 years and whom Nora had worked under with the professional efficiency of two people who respected each other's competence and had never discussed anything that wasn't operationally relevant. She had no idea what Haas knew about her real background. She suspected nothing the restructuring had been too thorough for anything to bleed through even to a direct supervisor. Haas answered on the third ring. "Vale, what's going on? I just got a flag on your file from—" "I know," Nora said. "That's why I'm calling." She talked for 12 minutes. She was as clear and as complete as she could be, without going into classified specifics over an unsecured line. She told Haas about the shot, about Voss, about the fitness referral, about the IG session. She spoke in the flattened, factual register of a logistics officer presenting an inventory discrepancy, the same register she'd used for 19 years, because it was the one that got things into the record accurately. When she finished, Haas was quiet for 6 seconds. "You're telling me," Haas said, slowly, "that you were a Tier 1 precision asset buried in my supply chain." "Yes, ma'am." Another pause. "And that a 3-star tried to have you evaluated because you made a shot." "Among other reasons." Captain Haas's voice had a new quality in it that Nora hadn't heard before, not shock exactly, more like a woman recalibrating a long-held assumption at speed. "I've been your CO for 3 years. You have never been late, never been wrong, never been anything other than the most boringly competent officer in my section." A pause. "I once watched you spend 4 hours correcting a procurement error that wasn't even your fault, just because it was in the system and it was wrong." Nora said nothing. "That fitness referral," Haas said, "lands on my desk. It probably will. Then I'm going to need your statement on record with my office before it does." She said it with the brisk decision of a woman who had been managing institutional problems for long enough to know which ones needed to be front-run. "Get me a written statement. Tonight, if you can. I'll deal with whatever comes through channels." "Ma'am," Nora said, "I appreciate it." "Don't," Haas said. "Just send the statement." A pause, and then, quieter. "For what it's worth the shot. 4,000 meters? 4107. A short silence. "Christ," Haas said, and ended the call. Voss made one more attempt at 1,700. He came to the corridor outside the IG conference room with his JAG officer and asked to speak with Marsh. Marsh let him in for 15 minutes. Nora didn't hear what was said, but she heard the tones Voss's controlled, the JAG's procedural, Marsh's flat. When the JAG officer's voice rose slightly on a point of process, Marsh's voice dropped rather than rising to meet it, which was a technique Nora recognized. Came out at 1,715. Voss walked past her in the corridor. He was moving correctly, pace, posture, all of it right, and his face was composed, and if you hadn't been watching his hands, you might have missed it. His right hand at his side was pressed slightly inward against his thigh. Not a fist, just pressure. The hand of a man maintaining composure through a physical anchor. He didn't look at her. She looked at him. She tracked him down the corridor until he turned the corner, and then she turned back to the window at the corridor's end. Outside, the Nevada evening was doing what Nevada evenings did, going from punishing to beautiful in about 40 minutes, the light dropping fast, the desert going gold, and then amber, and then the first deep purple at the ridgeline. Pike appeared at her shoulder. His aide is packing the SUV, he said. He's leaving? His JAG-G told Marsh's team they're returning to base pending formal proceedings. The JAG used the word voluntarily. Pike's voice was dry. Marsh didn't object. Nora watched the light change on the ridgeline. He'll get lawyers, she said. Real ones, not JAG. Outside's counsel. Yes, and there'll be a period where this looks like a dispute between competing narratives, where it's a decorated general with a 40-year career versus a logistics captain with a sanitized file. Yes, Pike said. There will be that period. How long? He thought about it. Depends on how the signals data holds. If Reeves authenticates the parallel channel and traces the encryption signature through official NSA channels, the evidentiary picture changes. Takes time, but it's binary. Either it confirms or it doesn't. He paused. If it confirms, then it's not just a hold order anymore. And then it's not just Voss anymore. It potentially opens questions about what the intelligence objective actually was. Who knew what? Whether anyone above Voss's level. She said, I know. She pressed her fingers against the cool glass of the window. The ridgeline was going purple now, and the valley below it was already dark, and it looked entirely different from the place she'd fired into yesterday. Morning softer, less honest, the distance flattened by the dying light. She thought about the 9 seconds she'd held in Pankisi with the order in her earpiece. She thought about the 19 years of the hold that had come after. She thought about David Okoro driving through the Nevada dark with a waterproof pouch in his passenger seat. Read, she said. He's still here, Pike said. I think he's writing something. Statement? Probably. He's been in the smaller conference room for 2 hours with a legal pad. Pike paused. Called someone. I don't know who. She nodded. You should sleep, Pike said. Okoro gets here around midnight. You'll want to be coherent. I slept 3 hours last night. I know. You look it. She turned from the window. Looked at him. He looked back at her with the expression of a man who had worked alongside difficult people in difficult places for long enough that he no longer felt the need to make things look easier than they were. When this is over, he said, what do you want? It was a real question. She took it seriously. I want my record back, she said. Not as a gesture, as a fact. Every operational entry, every qualification, everything that was taken. She paused. And I want it used. Not filed somewhere and marked restored. Actually used. A program, a training structure. Something that means the next person they try to bury has somewhere to go. He looked at her for a moment. That's a lot to want, he said. I've had 19 years to figure out what to want, she said. He nodded, turned to go, stopped. For what it's worth, he said, not turning back. That morning in Pankisi, when the valley went quiet, he paused. I knew someone was on the gun. I didn't know who. But I knew it was deliberate, and I knew it was professional. His voice was even. I thought about it for a long time. She waited. Thank you, he said. Just that. Then he walked down the corridor and turned the corner and was gone. She stood at the window for another minute. The valley was completely dark now. The ridgeline had lost its color entirely and gone to silhouette. Somewhere out there at 4,107 meters, a painted steel target was sitting in the dark with a center mass impact mark that the desert heat and the Nevada wind would not remove. Turned from the window and went to write her statement. She finished the statement at 2,140 and slid under Cross's door because his light was still on and she didn't want to knock and she didn't want to talk anymore that night. Then she went to her room, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the wall for approximately 4 minutes before lying down fully clothed and closing her eyes. She didn't expect to sleep. She slept. Okoro arrived at 23. She heard the car in the lot and was up before it stopped, boots on, face washed, standing at the window, watching him get out. He moved stiffly 6 hours of driving after an already long day, and he stood beside his car for a moment in the parking lot, dark, looking at the facility, and she could see from this distance that he was doing the same thing she'd done when she arrived. Reading the space, cataloging it, the old instinct of a man trained to know where he was before he moved. She met him at the door. He handed her the pouch without ceremony. Everything from the box, plus the drive. I made a third copy and left it with a lawyer in Reno. Sealed. Instructions to open if I don't check in within 72 hours. She looked at him. I'm not 23 anymore, he said. I learned things. She nodded. Marsh wants you at 0800. A signals analyst from Nellis will be here to authenticate the digital data. What kind of analyst? Technical division. She didn't say more than that. He nodded, looked around the corridor. Is there coffee? Vending machine. It's bad. I've had worse. He started toward it, then stopped. Turned. The parallel channel data. When I told you this morning, you didn't look surprised. She considered how to answer that. I wasn't surprised by what it was, she said. I was surprised you had it. He looked at her for a moment. I thought about not keeping it, he said, after the sweep team left. I had it on a drive, and I thought this is the kind of thing that ruins lives. Mine, specifically. He pushed his glasses up. Then I thought about the 12 guys who came out of that valley, and about whoever was on the gun that made that possible. And I kept it. She looked at him. Thank you, she said. Same words she'd said to Pike. Same plainness. No performance in it. He nodded once, got his coffee from the machine, grimaced at the first sip, and went to find a room. The authentication session began at 812 and ran until 1340. The Nellis analyst was a woman named Sergeant First Class Yolanda Reyes, mid-30s, compact, with the quiet self-assurance of someone who was very good at a specific thing and had stopped needing anyone to acknowledge it. She worked through the USB drive's contents, with Okoro beside her, running the channel logs through a signals analysis program, pulling the encryption signature against a classified database that she accessed from a hardened laptop, with a security key she wore on a chain under her shirt. Marsh observed. Reeves documented. Nora sat outside the room and waited. She was not good at waiting in chairs. She had always been better at waiting in the field, where waiting was active reading terrain. Reading conditions, building a picture. Chair waiting was just time passing. She dealt with it by writing not the statement she'd already filed, but notes in her data book, the kind she'd always kept. Observations, details, the specific quality of light through the corridor window at different hours. The sound pattern of the facility. Small things that meant nothing and kept her mind from chewing on the things she couldn't control. Pike came and went twice. He brought actual coffee, the second time real coffee, from somewhere in the facility she hadn't found, and set it beside her without comment and left again. Cross appeared at 1100 and sat in the chair across from her for 7 minutes without speaking. He had paperwork in his hand that he wasn't reading. After the 7 minutes, he said, "My call to the IG last night, before you transmitted. I want you to know it wasn't because of the shot." She looked at him. "The shot demonstrated something," he said. "What I responded to." He paused. "I've been in long enough to know what a buried record looks like. I've seen it done, usually to people who'd seen something or done something that inconvenienced someone with more rank." He turned the paperwork in his hand. "It's not something I've ever personally arranged, but I've looked away from it twice in my career. Things that felt above my pay grade. Things I told myself were handled at a level I didn't have full visibility into." He looked at the window. "Thought about those twice." She said nothing. "This is the third time I had the choice," he said. "I wanted you to know I didn't find it easy. It's not a small thing, what this will do to Voss's career. To people connected to him. Whatever he has 40 years of service and people who believed in him." "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you to feel bad about it." "I don't feel bad about it," she said. I feel bad about the 19 years. This part I feel, she searched for the word, clear about. He nodded, stood, went back to his office. At 1347, Marsh opened the conference room door and looked at Nora. "Come in," she said. Nora came in. Reyes had packed her laptop and was standing by the wall with her arms crossed. Okoro was at the table, tired, with an empty coffee cup, and the particular expression of a man who had spent the last 5 hours watching someone verify something he'd been carrying alone for 19 years. Marsh sat down, looked at her notes, looked at Nora. "The channel data is authentic," she said. "SFC Reyes has confirmed the encryption signature matches a Foreign Intelligence Service communications profile consistent with FSB operational encryption from the 2002 to 2007 period." She paused. "Timestamps are intact and internally consistent. The channel was active for 4 hours and 17 minutes, beginning at 340 local time, December 15th, 8 hours and 11 minutes before the hold order was transmitted on the operational frequency." The room was quiet. "The channel log shows 2 endpoints," Marsh continued. "One endpoint is localized to the staging zone consistent with a handheld encrypted radio at the primary operations position." She looked up. "The other endpoint traces to a relay station consistent with signals infrastructure used by a foreign intelligence service for regional operations during that period." Nora sat with that. "You're saying there's a documented communication," she said carefully, "between someone at the staging zone and a foreign signals relay 8 hours before the hold order." "That's what the data shows," Marsh said. "Attribution of who was operating the staging zone endpoint requires further investigation. Combined with your photographic account of the secondary meeting, the operational timeline, and the documented restructuring of your service record, we have enough to forward this to the Counterintelligence Division." She paused. "This is no longer an IG matter. This is a CI matter. Those are different processes with different authorities. What happens to Voss? He'll be notified of the investigation's scope expansion. His access will be suspended pending review. Beyond that," Marsh shook her head slightly. "That's not my lane anymore. CI will make those determinations." "How long?" "These investigations don't move fast," Marsh said. "Months. Possibly longer. There are a lot of threads here." Nora looked at the table. Months. She'd waited 19 years, so months was something she could work with, but the shape of it was still uncomfortable, the not knowing, the open window, the period of pending, that wasn't resolution. "What about my record?" she said. Marsh opened a folder. "That I can move faster on. The restructuring authorization, I found it this morning in the JAG archive. Paperwork was filed under Voss's authority, classified above your access level, which is what made it legally inaccessible to you." She set a document on the table. "The authorization required your consent under the applicable regulation. Your consent was misrepresented. You signed an acknowledgement, not a consent form, and the JAG officer who obtained your signature did not clarify the distinction." She paused. "That's a procedural violation. The restructuring is challengeable on those grounds alone, independent of anything else." Nora looked at the document. It takes time," Marsh said. "But it's clean. It's administrative, not prosecutorial. I can initiate the challenge through personnel records today, and the record restoration process begins within 30 days. 30 days. 19 years and then 30 days. Pressed her hands flat on the table. Felt the surface, cool and solid. Said nothing for a moment. "Do it," she said. Reed was waiting for her in the corridor when she came out. He was standing with his cover in his hands again, that same gesture, the same nervous rotation, and when he saw her, he stopped rotating it and held it still. He looked like a man who had slept badly and was aware of it. "Heard the session wrapped," he said. "Just now." He nodded. Looked at the cover. "My statement. I gave it to Marsh this morning." He paused. "About what Voss said to me. The referral request. All of it. I know. Thank you." He shook his head slightly. "Don't thank me. I should have come to you the minute he left the room. He looked up. I sat on it for 6 hours. I was managing my own exposure, calculating. He said it with the specific disgust of a man who has caught himself doing something he doesn't respect. That's not who I want to be. She looked at him. You came to my room, she said. That night. You came. Barely. Read. She said it without impatience. You came. What matters? He held her gaze for a moment. The evaluation, he said. The program MCT-7. I submitted the confirmation report this morning. Your result is in the official record as the confirming demonstration. He paused. Your name, your result, the conditions, equipment. All of it on file. Something moved in her chest. Not large, just the recognition of a thing that had been withheld for a long time finally being given, even if it was a small thing. Your program moves forward, she said. Our program, he said. You confirmed it. She looked at him for a moment. Then she held out her hand. He shook it. His grip was firm and a little longer than necessary, and when he let go, he looked like he'd said something he'd been trying to say without finding the words. She called her mother that evening. This was not something she'd been planning to do. She'd been planning to drive to a diner she'd seen on the highway into town and eat something real and sit in a booth alone and decompress in the particular silence of public spaces, which had always worked for her better than private silence. But she was in the car with the engine on, and she picked up her phone, and before she'd consciously decided anything she was listening to it, ring. Her mother picked up on the fourth ring, which was typical. Nora. Just the name, the way her mother had always said it short, a little flat, the tone of a woman who had spent 67 years not wasting syllables. Mom, you sound tired. I am tired. A pause. The comfortable kind, the kind that existed between people who had been having conversations long enough that silence didn't need to be filled. Something happened. A lot happened, Nora said. Most of it I can't talk about. But she stopped. Started again. You know how I told you, when they moved me to logistics, that it was just an administrative thing? A transition? I never believed that, her mother said. Nora was quiet for a moment. I know you didn't. I didn't ask because I could see you needed me not to. I know. She looked at the facility lights coming on across the lot as the evening fell. It wasn't a transition. She paused. Someone needed me to disappear. And I let them, because I didn't know what else to do. Her mother said nothing, just listened. I stopped disappearing, Nora said. Yesterday, or 2 days ago. The days are... She stopped. Got complicated. Are you all right? I think so. She pressed her thumb against the steering wheel. I think I will be. Nora, her mother's voice. Come home when it's done. I'll make food. Nora almost laughed. It came out as something shorter, more compressed, but real. Okay. She drove to the diner, ordered eggs and toast, because it was what was on the laminated menu that she could point to without thinking. She ate alone in a corner booth with the low sound of the place around her, 2 other customers at the counter, Cook's radio, playing something country and indistinct, and she let the noise be company without being conversation, which was exactly what she needed. She thought about almost nothing. When thoughts came, she let them pass. The eggs were overcooked. The toast was good. She drank 3 cups of coffee that were better than the vending machine and worse than Pike's thermos, and somewhere in the acceptable middle. She paid cash and drove back. The counterintelligence team arrived the following morning. 4 of them in 2 vehicles, with credentials from an agency whose name Marsh did not say aloud and did not write down. They went into the conference room with the full document set, Okoro's originals, Reyes' authentication report, Marsh's IG findings, and they stayed in there for 6 hours. And they spoke to Nora for 90 minutes of those 6 hours, and they spoke to Okoro for 2 hours. And at the end of it, the lead agent, a man who introduced himself only as Harrison, came to find her in the corridor. He was around 50, the kind of face that was specifically unmemorable, not ugly. Not handsome, nothing that would make you look twice. A very deliberate face to have in his line of work. Captain Vale, he said. I want to be straightforward with you about what you can expect. Please, she said. The investigation will take time. Voss will have counsel. There will be a period, could be 6 months, could be longer, where nothing visible happens. That's normal. It's not inaction. The work will be moving. But you won't see it, I understand. During that period, you may experience pressure. Indirect. Through your chain of command, through professional channels, through people who have relationships with Voss and don't know the full picture. That's also normal. He paused. If anything happens that feels like targeted interference, any kind, you call me directly. He held out a card. Plain. Just a number. She took it. One more thing, he said. The parallel channel data. You need to understand that if this goes where the evidence suggests it goes, it becomes something larger than Ponkisi. There will be questions about other operations, other decisions. He looked at her steadily. You may be asked to testify in proceedings you don't currently have visibility into. Testimony about what you saw, what you were ordered to do, what the operational environment looked like from your position. Testify, she said. It may not be comfortable. It hasn't been comfortable for 19 years, she said. Testifying in a room is easier than lying in the snow at -14, waiting to see if someone's going to survive. He held her gaze. Then he nodded once, the nod of a man who had just confirmed something he already suspected, and went back to the conference room. Voss was formally suspended from active duty 14 days later. Nora learned this not from an official notification. She wasn't in that chain, but from Pike, who texted her a single line, suspension confirmed. Effective today. She was at her desks at Fort Irwin when the message came in. She read it, set the phone down, and sat for a moment looking at the inbox full of resupply manifests and procurement queries and the ordinary ongoing paperwork of a logistics section that did not stop moving because large things were happening elsewhere. Then she picked up the phone and texted back, "Thanks." The phone in her drawer and went back to work. Haas found her 2 hours later. She came into Nora's office, a small room, one window, a desk that was too big for it, and closed the door, and sat in the chair across the desk, with the expression of a woman who had been thinking about something for 2 weeks and had arrived at a conclusion. The record restoration, Haas said. Marsh's office. 30-day timeline. Yes, ma'am. It comes through in 3 days. She looked at Nora. I've already seen the preliminary flag in the personnel system. Going to the restored file is significantly different from what I've been working with for 3 years. I know. Haas was quiet for a moment. You cleaned my supply chain for 3 years, she said finally. You fixed 17 procurement errors that weren't yours. You rewrote the inventory protocol because the existing one had a gap that was going to cause problems in a readiness inspection. She paused. You were doing the job like it mattered. It did matter, Nora said. Supply chains matter. People depend on them. You were a Tier 1 precision asset. And then I was a logistics officer, Nora said. Both things were real. Haas looked at her for a moment. What happens now, with your assignment? I don't know yet. She kept her voice even. Cross has submitted a proposal. Training program. Long-range precision, built around realistic atmospheric conditions and field methodology. He wants me to help design the curriculum and eventually run it. She paused. I haven't decided. What's the hesitation? She thought about how to say it accurately. Teaching is, she stopped. I've been invisible for 19 years. Being visible is going to take adjustment. Being visible in a capacity where I'm supposed to be. She searched for the word. Exemplary. That's a different weight than I'm used to carrying. Haas looked at her steadily. You know what I've noticed about you? Tell me, you fix things, Haas said. Quietly, without flagging it, without needing anyone to notice. You see something broken, and you fix it because it should be fixed. She paused. That's not a logistics skill. That's just who you are. She stood. Program. If Cross is offering, take it. Not because you owe anyone anything. Because you're good at fixing things, and there are a lot of things still broken. She went to the door. Stopped. For what it's worth, Captain, you were the best logistics officer I've ever had. She looked back. I'm going to miss the hell out of you. Called Cross that evening. The program, she said. I have conditions. I expected you would, he said. Tell me. Accountability structure built into the curriculum. Not as an addendum, as a foundation. Specifically, what to do when an order conflicts with what's happening in front of you. How to document, who to call, what your rights are. She paused. Every precision trainee who goes through the program understands that their first obligation is to the people to their left and right, and that there is a process when those obligations conflict with the chain of command. Pause. That's going to create friction with some senior officers. Yes, she said, it is. Okay, he said. She waited. That was faster than she'd expected. What else? He said. Okoro, she said. He spent 19 years sitting on material that could have ended him. He's retired, but he has a background that the program can use. Signals integration, comms architecture in extreme conditions. If he's willing, I want him on the design team. I'll make the call myself, Cross said. What else? Pike, she said. Consulting capacity at minimum. He has field experience with long-range support operations that's not replicable from a textbook. Done. Another pause. Anything for yourself? She thought about that. My name on the program, she said, not hidden in the curriculum notes, not buried in the technical appendix. On the program, as the director. A pause. That's not ego. It's if this program is going to mean what I want it to mean, it needs to be attached to a name with a story. So people know the story exists. Cross was quiet for a moment. Done, he said. When can you start? Give me 2 weeks. I can give you 3. 2 is enough, she said. The program launched 8 months later under the formal designation, Long Range Precision Integration Program, Advanced Field Methodology. The internal designation, the one that went into casual usage among the trainees, was simpler. They called it Vale's Range. Nobody decided that. It just happened. The way the best names happened, because it was accurate and because everyone knew it. The first class was 22 trainees, a mix of services, all volunteer. They arrived at Black Mesa on a Monday morning in spring, when the desert was doing the brief, temporary thing it did between winter cold and summer heat, when the air was clean and the visibility was absolute, and the distant ridgeline was sharp enough to count individual stones at range. Nora stood at the firing line and looked at them. They were young, younger than she remembered being at that age, which was the illusion that every person over 40 carried, and which she knew was an illusion, and which didn't make it less persistent. They were good. She'd reviewed every service record, every qualification score. They were motivated. A few of them were already looking at her with the expression she recognized from her own career, the expression of young operators in the presence of someone with a significant reputation, part reverence, part skepticism, part competitive instinct. She let them look. One of them, a young Marine sergeant named Calloway, 2 deployments, top range score in his class. Stepped forward slightly. Not insubordinate. Just the way confident people occupy space. Ma'am, he said, the 4,000-meter shot. The MCT-7 confirmation. He paused. Can you actually do it again? Or was that a one-time conditions thing? A few of the others went slightly still. The question was honest and slightly provocative, and exactly the right question for someone in his position to ask. She looked at him. Set up the target, she said. She didn't fire. Immediately. She stood at the line and looked at the valley for 3 minutes, while Calloway and 2 others ran the target's silhouette out to the measurement flag. She watched the wind ribbons she'd placed before the class arrived, pulled her kestrel, and took readings. She opened her data book, the same data book, electrical tape cover, worn by spiral, and made 3 notations. Calloway came back and stood behind the line with the others. She lay down behind the TAC 50. Got still. The class waited. She could feel them behind her, 22 people, learning how to read silence, some of them already understanding that what they were watching was not preparation theater, but actual preparation. The kind that looked like nothing and was everything. 2 minutes, 3. She fired. 6 seconds. The radio operator at the target end, Okoro, who had driven down from Reno and was now technically a civilian curriculum consultant, and who was very bad at taking days off, came over the radio with the same 5 words. Impact confirmed. Center mass. Nobody made a sound for a moment. Then Calloway said, very quietly, to nobody in particular, "Okay." She sat up, turned to face them, looked at the 22 faces in the Nevada morning. "The shot is the easy part," she said. 4,000 meters is a physics problem. It has a solution. You put in the work, you understand the variables. You build the patience to wait for the right window, and the physics will cooperate. She paused. The hard part is everything that happens when you're not behind the rifle. The moments when following the right order and following orders aren't the same thing. She looked at them steadily. This program will teach you to shoot. It will also teach you what to do when shooting isn't the answer and when holding fire is the worst decision you can make. She closed the data book. You're going to learn both. You're going to learn why both matter. And you're going to leave here knowing that your obligation to the person on your left and your right is not superseded by anything except an order that is clearly, provably, documentably wrong. Stood. And when you encounter that order, she said, you're going to know exactly what to do. Because someone is going to teach you, and that someone was taught the hard way. She looked at Calloway. Questions? He looked at her for a moment. Then, when do we start? You already did, she said. Pike drove out from Las Vegas that weekend. He arrived Saturday morning in a truck that had seen better years, parked it in the lot, and found her on the eastern observation deck with a cup of coffee and her data book, and the specific quality of stillness that he'd come to understand was not contemplation, but a different kind of attention, the kind that was looking at something, just not anything visible. He sat on the other end of the bench. Same bench, same positions. He had his thermos. He poured 2 cups this time and set one beside her. Picked it up. It was better than the vending machine. Always was. First class, he said. How was it? Good, she said. One of them is going to be exceptional. Calloway. He asks the right questions wrong, which means he's thinking and doesn't know how to stop yet. She paused. That's fixable. And the others? 3 are better than their scores show. 2 are exactly what their scores show. The rest are somewhere in between. She drank the coffee. They're good kids. Kids, he said. I know, she said. I know. They sat in the morning quiet for a while. The valley was doing what the valley did. Heat building, light sharpening, the far ridgeline going from shadow to full exposure as the sun cleared the eastern peaks. Down on the range, one of the facility staff was marking a new measurement line for the day's exercise. Boss Pike said. I heard, she said, last week. The formal counterintelligence findings had been classified, which meant neither of them knew the full picture. What they knew, what had become known through the careful, incomplete process of large institutional proceedings, was that Voss's suspension had become a separation, that JAG proceedings were ongoing, and that 2 other officers connected to the Pankisi operation had been placed under review. Parallel channel data had opened questions that went beyond what Nora had seen in a ruined stone building in the Georgian mountains 19 years ago. Questions that were now someone else's job to answer. She had testified twice, both times in closed sessions. Both times she had told the same story she'd been telling since the conference room at Black Mesa, and both times people listening had asked the same quality of question that told her they had already found things she hadn't known about and were using her account to triangulate rather than initiate. It was out of her hands. It had been out of her hands from the moment she'd walked to the firing line with an aluminum case and a paper bag. 12 men, Pike said. I know, from Ponkisi. I reached out to as many as I could find. He turned his thermos cup in his hand. Told them what I knew, what had happened, who had been on the gun. He paused. Most of them said they'd always wondered. He looked at the valley. One of them, Hendricks, he was a petty officer second class. He's running a HVAC business in Ohio now, he said. Pike stopped. Started again. He said he thinks about that morning a lot. That there was a point where he thought they weren't getting out. And then the position started going quiet. And he thought someone's there. Someone's working. He paused. He wanted me to tell you something. She waited. He said, I named my daughter after the valley, Pike said. I didn't know why until now. But now I think maybe I was trying to keep it close. So I wouldn't forget what it meant to get home. The valley was fully lit now, the heat starting to press, the first shimmer beginning above the desert floor. Somewhere at 4,107 meters. The target scent silhouette stood in the morning with 2 center mass impact marks yesterday's, and the one she'd put there 8 months ago on a day that had changed the shape of everything. She looked at it for a long time. Then she finished her coffee, set the cup down, and stood up. I have a class in 40 minutes, she said. Pike nodded. Stayed where he was, looking at the valley. She picked up her data book and her empty cup and started back toward the facility. At the door she stopped and turned. He was still on the bench. Still looking at the valley. The morning light was full on him now, and he looked exactly like what he was. A man who had lived through things. Who was still living. Who had not figured everything out and was not pretending to. She looked at him for a moment. Owen, she said. He turned. Thank you, she said, for sitting down on the bench. He looked at her. Then something moved in his face, not a smile, exactly, but something warmer than the careful expressions he'd been managing since the first morning. Something that was just itself. Go teach your class, he said. She went. The Nevada morning was building around her as she walked, heat rising, light flattening, the range coming alive with the sounds of a new day's preparation. She could hear the trainees at the line, the specific sounds of a class getting ready, equipment checks, range safety protocols, the low back and forth of people working through something together. She thought about 19 years. She thought about the shot. She thought about a valley in the Georgian mountains, where 12 men had come home and one woman had paid the cost of that and then kept paying it in silence for long enough that the silence had started to feel like who she was rather than something that had been done to her. She was 44 years old, and her knees hurt in the morning, and she still woke sometimes at 4 a.m. with the cold weight of the hold order in her earpiece and the decision crystallizing in the dark. She would not stop waking that way. She knew that. Some things didn't resolve, they just found the place where they live in you and stay there. And you learn the shape of them, and you move around them, and eventually they become part of the geography rather than the emergency. She was here. The program was real. The record was restored. The name was on the door. And 22 people were waiting at a firing line to learn not just how to shoot, but what it meant to carry the ability to commit, to cause harm, and the obligation to choose carefully, and the knowledge of what to do when the choice was harder than any shot. Pushed open the range door and walked out into the light. They tried to bury her beneath a title that didn't fit, behind a desk in a building no one watched. They took her record and her rank and 19 years of mornings she can't get back. They made one mistake. They left her patience. And patience, in the hands of someone who knows how to wait for the right window, is the most dangerous thing in the world. Know what you stand for. Hold it when it costs you. The right moment always comes.